Hello, everyone. Welcome to this discussion on abortion and the queer community. I am Andrea Dibben, and I'll be moderating this discussion. Together with us today, we have Lara Dimitrijevic from the Women's Rights Foundation, we have Mina from European Greens, and we have Emily Galea, yes, from Young Progressive Beings. Okay, so welcome, and the first question that I would like to ask each of you, and like you can decide who's going to start. So why is the issue of reproductive rights in general and abortion in particular important for the queer community?
Off you go.
I'll start. Great. I realized abortion was important to the queer community when I started working more actively on trans issues and trans rights at a European level, where you still have countries which sterilize trans people. And so if I was going to fight against the sterilization of trans people because it's a reproductive rights issue, then it kind of made sense to look at what's happening on the other end of things, right? And also fight for access to abortion. Now, whether that is for trans men, non-binary, people who have wombs, or cis women, I think that it's important to have that access and that broader conversation on reproductive rights, which to me comes down to bodily autonomy and what we're allowed to do with our bodies, where I see, therefore, much more community that can be built between the trans activism, intersex activism, abortion rights, and disability, than between, let's say, gender identity issues and sexual orientation issues. So there was something there that was resonating in these fields where I started to work more actively and look at more actively of how the medical community and therefore then the politicization of medicine is used to control what certain people do with our bodies. And so this was really important for me to make. Once that clicked, then I was like, okay, that needs to work together. And when it comes to abortion and the queer community, of course, I think that really depends on every different local context. Because if we look in places where, perhaps outside of Europe, but where lesbian women might be subject to also corrective rape, then abortion access feels pretty urgent. If there's that kind of violence on lesbian bodies, and so that's let's say perhaps what sounds like a pretty extreme and very violent case, right? But then obviously, just as everyone else might need to access this healthcare, and you want to be able to do it in a safe space. So if a trans man needs an abortion and accesses healthcare and is not in a safe space to access a gynecologist, for example, or is in a female-only clinic, or is looking at healthcare services that are advertised only to women, he might walk into those spaces and feel left out. And then that might, complicate matters. So I think there's really importance to recognize also these nuances.
I think, from my perspective, it was always kind of a sort of united issue, I suppose. Reproductive rights and our LGBT rights as well. We are ultimately advocating for rights to the community as well. So, for example, when you think about it, members of the community are ultimately statistically more likely to face sexual assault, for example. So not having access to abortion healthcare would mean that they do not have access in these moments as well. And of course, as Mina just pointed out, in the same way that we are I think it is a sort of parallel issue when it comes to fighting for bodily autonomy. Down to the root of it, it comes from the same sort of principle. When we're fighting for bodily autonomy for the trans community, ultimately, I think that we shouldn't then sort of draw a line and be like reproductive issues are a separate matter. We should sort of see them as a much more, from a bigger picture. And I think that in any human rights issue, we need to have a much more united idea of what it means to have access to rights. We shouldn't be sort of individualizing each of our issues and not taking a broader perspective that ultimately leaves anyone out. And I think one of the main things that I've heard a lot when I've spoken about this topic is, for example, the linguistics that people use, you know, that they would say that the trans community, when they would speak about reproductive rights, would be excluding women because they're not using the term women. When they would be using the term women, they would be simply including more terms than that. And it is important to note the difference between being exclusive and inclusive. You know, they are not saying that, you know, women are not at an important part of discussion. Women are an extremely important part of discussion, but that doesn't mean that we need to blindside any other people within the community as well. So on that front, yes, I don't see them as separate issues. And I think that most of all, we have a very common oppressor. You know, I do believe that these issues are so interlinked to patriarchy that they cannot, in order to fight patriarchy, we need to do it together. If you, for example, look at the alliances, these fascist organizations across Europe, we are facing the same oppressors. You know, we are a lot of the people who are fighting against LGBTQI rights are fighting against reproductive rights. So I don't see why, for example, these issues are not seen as a more united one. But yes,
there's a lot to unpack there.
Yes.
And I'll get back to you with some of those questions later. Lara, anything to add?
Definitely a lot to unpack. But I think for me, and again, as a human rights activist, one of the things that bothers me down to the core is how we need to talk of why is reproductive rights important to the queer community.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, the premise should be reproductive rights is a fundamental human right as much as the identification of the gender of a person is a fundamental human right. So, you know, the fact that we're still today, till this very day, and I would say more particularly so in our little island here, that we're going to need to have this conversation, you know, just frustrates me down to the core. I mean, for people that know me, when I lose it, I lose my shit, you know, because ultimately this is what it is. We are talking about basic, fundamental human rights. You know, the fact that we're talking about bodily autonomy, basic fundamental human rights. And as Emily mentioned, you know, I mean, yes, we are still now at a point in time where we have to fight against this goddamn patriarchy, you know, this big monster that is now infiltrating in different narratives, in different languages, in different manners, you know, but ultimately we still have to struggle. And I think the united front at this point in time and actually seeing you know, the basic principle, the fundamentality of it all is crucial, is absolutely crucial, because they have to go together, they have to be united. You know, we're talking about something that does affect every person, as you were saying, you know, any person that owns a uterus, any person that is trans, whoever, you know, and ultimately we are all on the same front. So we need to unite in this one. We need to ensure that, listen, I mean, I would say we need to go as far as ensuring that access to reproductive justice is codified as a basic fundamental right, as any other right, my right to privacy or anything else, you know, and, you know, now is the time that we join the forces. Sorry, it just angers me.
Yes, definitely. And in fact, when we look at the pro-choice movements in general, in other countries, there have been some countries where the movement was not so intersectional, okay? It was quite exclusionary. But we have also seen other regions, especially recently in South America, where they're setting a great example. And as for those of you who are not Maltese, and you might not know, in Malta we have a yearly blanket ban on abortion. We're still fighting for basic access to abortion. And the pro-choice movement is young. is very, very young. In fact, we had MGRM, which we're so happy about, the Malta LGBT rights movement, who actually joined the pro-choice coalition Voice for Choice last year. And my question to you is, how can we avoid making the mistakes of perhaps other movements, pro-choice movements in the past? How can we make the pro-choice movement truly inclusive and queering the pro-choice movement, basically? What do you think we should be doing more? How can we be more open?
I think, if I may, I think one of the advantages that we have is that we have done everything opposite to the rest of the world.
Yeah.
No, we talk about, I mean, I'm often asked, how is it
Yes.
possible that you had, up until a few months ago, a total ban on abortion, yet, you know, you pride yourself in being at the forefront for LGBTIQ rights? You know, how can one put those
Yes.
two together?
It's one of those questions that everybody asks
Everybody asks, you know, and I think this is an advantage in a way that we have. So as you're saying, you know, Andrea, we're still at the infancy of starting this, you know, the pro-choice movement. And I think from the very beginning, we have managed to unite as much as possible. And we are also very conscious about the intersectionality of it. So not just with the LGBTI community, we're very much more aware of you know, other minority migrant women, for example, you know. So I think in a way, as much as it is a disadvantage to a certain extent that we still have to work towards in 2023 to fight for at least some basic access to abortion care, we already are aware of other mistakes, our own needs and our own inclusivity, and the good practices from other countries. So I see that as a plus. I think as activists, I feel, I could be wrong, but I feel that we are very conscious about it.
I think from the coming at it from the perspective of a trans person, I was so happy last year when the judicial protest was being discussed, and you know, non-binary and people and trans men were invited to also sign the judicial protest alongside many cis women, and the language of the judicial protest itself was drafted in a way that was extremely inclusive from the get-go, and that was amazing, right? Because it would be terrible if trans and non-binary folks had to be kind of fighting within such a small space, right? Just to be listened to and heard. The fact that we start at that, let's say, same level, it means we are able to contribute more fully to the conversation and are brought in almost automatically, right? And so to me, I mean, obviously MGRM joining the Voice for Choice coalition was great. Very clear message also to the LGBTI community about human rights as a whole, right? And it's reproductive rights, and MGRM fighting for, you know, the trans legal gender recognition to not be based on any medical considerations was part of reproductive rights. MGRM ensuring that we have access to PrEP, and PEP is part of sexual health, right? And broader sexual health issues, and this falls also under it. So obviously there are many angles in which we could tackle, like abortion as what do we do next? Who's focusing on awareness raising? Who's focusing on education, right? But knowing that whether it's in the awareness raising, whether it is in, I don't know, sexual health or education that you will be offering, that trans people hopefully will be included in those conversations, means that it will spread, and that it will be almost considered a natural thing that LGBTI communities are involved in this conversation. So I'm excited with how it started. Yes, it is weird, but I think it's just as Lara said, like, things were just kind of a bit scrambled here, and it just resulted in you all becoming closer to our movement over the past 20 years, and coming to Pride and supporting us and helping us to advocate for things like equal marriage and legal gender recognition and access to trans healthcare. And now I guess it's time for the queer community to be like, well, we're here now with our stuff, and let's link up and work together. And another positive message, and I'm saying these not because I want to be like, yes, bravi, thank you, because you're here on the panel with me and all of that, but because...
Oh, we're happy to be with you.
But because we're in a current climate politically where there's so much backlash from some women's rights activists towards trans people. So, for example, when we had the a small moment together outside the courts to remember Sion, and the Women's Rights Foundation was there to recognize a trans woman who had been murdered some years, over 20 years ago, and to acknowledge that neither the women's rights movement nor the queer movement was ready to support Sion and her family and to advocate for justice in her case, which unfortunately we never got. The fact that Women's Rights Foundation was there with MGRM and everyone else was so special, because I know that in the UK that would not have happened, right? And it's such a strong message, and I'm saying this here at EuroPride so that those coming from other countries where the trans community is not supported by feminists or so-called feminists and women's rights organizations, to know that there's a best practice you can look at in Malta and say, like, look, like if the women's rights organization in Malta can stand with the trans community when we're mourning one of our trans siblings, then it shouldn't be so hard for that to be done elsewhere. And so it's these mutual kind of working together that is so important to keep the dialogue open and to keep us hopefully improving in all of these aspects.
In fact, when you were talking about the language, for example, used in the judicial protest, sometimes we get the feedback that Malta may not be ready for terms such as a person who could get pregnant, because we still don't have it for women. So why we shouldn't? And we were always, very, very clear that we don't care. I mean, we're gonna get backlash anyway, So might as well go the long haul and use the correct terminology and be inclusive in that terminology. And something that you mentioned on the judicial protest, I can say it because I was the one collecting the signatures. We had, I think, around 20% of the whole number of people who signed who were either lesbians or gender non-binary or trans men or members of the queer community who were actually part of that. So it's not just a few people, it's an integral part. It was like 20% for sure.
I think also, like, when it comes to, the terminology that's used for people who can give birth, etc. If you, for example, look at the Trans Journalists Association, and what they've said on the topic, it's that ultimately they don't even, what they are advocating for when it comes to media guidelines is not even to, as I said, exclude the term women. It's not to decentralize women from the movement at all. It's to be more inclusive. So I think that this narrative that we've received a lot when it comes to, when we're using, for example, women and other people who can give birth, etc., and these terms, I think where it's actually coming from is more of a place of hatred, really and truly. I think that criticism is ungrounded, to be honest, and it kind of pertains to this idea and fear-mongering that there's a takeover of a demographic which is so small and, of course, extremely significant, but at the end of the day, acknowledging someone's existence is not taking over an issue. It's simply including people in the conversation, in a conversation that is relevant to them, So again, this sort of this discussion on terminology can be, I think, almost purposely quite divisive when they try to say, oh, we're not people with uterus, we're not birth givers, etc. I think that is not coming from a place of genuine concern, but a way to cause fear and divisiveness.
It is also, if I could add on that, I mean, of course, part of the backlash narrative that they use, no? It's divide and conquer kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I was saying, in a way, given that how things happened in this country, and as you were saying, Mina, Jack, I mean, we always walked side by side, you know, we always marched together, pride after pride, supported each other in as many ways as possible. Actually, you know, as much as we're seeing the backlash happening locally, at the same time, the fact that we are so united has taught us already of how to deal with that. So you're talking about good practice. I see this as a good practice, you know, of how we have managed to find our balances, and how, as you know, as well as talk the UK, you know, the transphobic narrative, sort of how it's more difficult to have that here. I mean, I'm not saying it is not, but I think at least when it comes to organizations and activism, it's not so easy to have that introduced and to use that as a divide mechanism.
I think the anti-trans narratives in Malta are very much coming from the anti-abortion activists anyways.
Yes.
They
Yeah.
are the ones who are sort of
Exactly.
pioneering that style of messaging, right?
Yes.
I'm in court at the moment on a similar topic where I had to listen to someone say, you know, that he does not believe that there can be more than 2 genders and blah, 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 and made this whole fuss about it. And I think that's going to continue happening, but it's not coming from within
Yeah.
our spaces.
No.
And I think it's also because we are so close to each other, and we've gotten to know each other. So, you know, a lot of people know Alex Caruana, for example. So it's easy to pull him aside and talk to him about trans issues and try to understand it. You're not being scared by some mythical other,
Yeah.
right? Because we're not others to you
Yeah.
and to many of people in the
Yeah,
movement.
I mean,
because we know each other.
Mentioning Alex was with us on the first day when the Women's Rights Foundation published the position paper back
Yeah.
in 2017.
Yeah.
So he actually was standing with us. So from the start, I think that was the first time when actually someone had come out in favor of reproductive rights in Malta. And it was Women's Rights Foundation and Alex.
Yeah.
And someone else from Graffiti. So from the start, there was that inclusion.
For the context, Alex
Yeah.
Caruana is a known trans activist in Malta.
Yes.
So, but yeah, he's
Yes.
been there from the start with you, and
Yes.
and you know him. So you know you've gotten to know him, and you've
Yeah.
gotten to know me, and you've got to know other trans people and non-binary people, and we're
Yeah.
part of the conversations together. And so once you know someone, you reduce the fear, right?
Yes.
And that's what I see a lot.
Yes.
A lot of fear is based on the unknown, and they try to scare you with the unknown.
Mm-hmm.
But if we get to know each other and have those conversations and those dialogues, it's going to
Yeah.
be much
At the
better.
same time, I'm going to be a bit of a devil's advocate here. Like, we have seen some reluctance and even some hostility. Probably MGRM has seen much more of this because they're the ones who have to face the community from some LGBT persons on the media, politicians, who are actually against abortion and who feel that the LGBT community should stay out of this discussion. It has nothing to do with them. And yet, as you have all said, we see how usually it's the same groups and the same movements that are leading the backlash, and that they will go for women's rights, LGBT rights, etc. And we've seen it outside of Malta and the US, in Eastern Europe, but also seeing it here, as you mentioned. So what are your views on this? What is your message in general to these factions in the community who feel that, listen, let's not go into abortion because it's not our issue?
I think as well, it's kind of like when you hear people say, you know, like, oh, I'm not racist, I have a black friend.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's not quite how it works, you know, kind of thing. And this is present even in minority groups, you know, and marginalized groups. You can be a gay man and still be extremely misogynistic. It doesn't mean that just because you form part of one group that you cannot be part of a problem in another way, you know? And I think making this in the same way, for example, I've known feminists who are, well, TERFs, you know, trans exclusionary feminists, that are, you know, very exclusive, are completely anti-trans, or they are convinced that that it's an agenda, So I think that you can find these sort of hateful views in any corner, really, if you look for it, kind of thing. So I wouldn't say that. I would say that what Mina, Jack, and Lara have said about, on the whole, our activist communities are very united.
Yeah.
However, of course, there are going to be individuals who do not pertain to this idea and who are ultimately just, I think, trying to get some kind of outlet. And it's also, as you mentioned, the othering, this constant need that, for example, you always need someone below you. So for example, if I am oppressed, someone can convince me that someone else is below me, and that would empower me in some sort of way. And I would see this sort of like psychological, this positionality in a lot of these people, because they feel the need to be an oppressor sometimes, and that is in the feminist movement, that can be in the LGBTQI movement, but again, on the whole, I would say that we're very united.
I think I want to be very specific when we talk about a slight tangent, sorry. But when we talk about, let's say, trans-exclusionary, radical feminists, TERFs, anti-trans, in the UK they start calling them gender critical. They are primarily against trans women, okay? And I want to make that distinction. And because we're talking about abortion, it's not necessarily gonna, trans women don't really come into that conversation, but when we talk about exclusionary forces within, let's say, women's rights groups, it's a lot of that violence is against trans women. And so if you're a part of a broader women's rights kind of network, right, and you're all for abortion, but then there are some of you who are exclusionary towards trans women, I think in some spaces it might be easy to be like, but they're for abortion, let's keep them there. And it gets difficult, right? Because you don't want to like say, oh, we might be weaker with like that group of people, or so we need a lot of awareness within our community of how do we deal with that, right? Because I don't think it's something that I think about very often, and something that conversations that I'm having very often across Europe with different groups about how do progressive movements work with people who don't even recognize the personhood of trans women, right? How can progressive movements work with them if they are saying that they're okay for abortion rights, or they're out there with us for some social justice issues, right? But if they've denied the personhood to a whole group of people just based on the fact of their gender identity, then it feels so off, right? And I don't think anybody really has found a solution yet or a resolution yet, right? And in some groups, then you just become very clear where your boundaries are, and then exclusionary views are not going to be welcome. But I want to say that you've got a very vocal minority of people who are extremely trans-exclusionary, absolutely hate trans women, don't think they should exist, don't believe they are trans women, they don't believe these women are women. And then you've got people on the fence who are very easily start to be swayed by arguments like participation in sport or access to other areas of society, and start to drift. And those people that start to drift is where we need to be holding conversations. I don't mind sitting down and having a conversation with someone who has never met a trans person in their life, has been listening to some of these views, and is a bit scared. And I think that's okay. But I'm not necessarily then going to sit down with someone who makes their whole living sometimes out of bashing trans women, right? So anyway, so within the broader abortion, let's say, debate, and as we try to join fights and work together, like, we need to understand that while I wish we could put all our resources to fighting what we need to do next, some of those resources need to focus inside, and they need to focus on how we build that community, also around understanding and care, and bringing people on board and together with us, because unfortunately, society does not introduce people to trans people and to trans communities in the right way. There's a lot of stereotypes about trans women in particular. There's an invisibilization of trans men. Non-binary people are not really considered valid, right? So I don't blame someone for not knowing anything about my life. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so it's frustrating because it's not so much like the outside is asking us to divide our attention and our resources, but we need to be aware. And we do need to kind of reserve a bit of space there for learning and to bring people with us. And if we're going to be really shut down and we might lose someone who could be really valid. So it's a constant like battle in this gray area of, But a message to LGBTI people who are maybe not seeing the links, right? It's hard because, again, we're not these LGBTI people who are criticizing MGRM probably have never been members of MGRM, right? Probably never saw the point of something like Pride, right? There's certain things that kind of resonate with others. And if you've been to Pride and if you're a member of MGRM and if you're fighting for a trans person's bodily autonomy and other areas, and if you're in touch with disability communities and understand how the medical institutions try to harm us, you're probably going to be like, yes, MGRM, thank you. Mm-hmm. But if you're the kind of LGBTI person who's not interested in that because maybe you're privileged in other ways, like socioeconomic background, and you're not touched by that, anything that's happening outside of your own little bubble, then you'll criticize MGRM, but then MGRM is not for you, right? Yeah. I'm a member of MGRM. I'm not speaking on behalf of MGRM, but what I'm saying is, some organizations are not for everyone.
Mm-hmm. I would say that those people live in a society that we have all been brought up with, right? So we all literally took in, as our dear Marceline would say, okay, sucked in all that has been given to us as growing up, okay? So if you're brought up in a country where you've drummed in these religious, traditional values, just because they are a member of the queer community, they equally have been brought up in the same environment. Mm-hmm. So it's a matter of, once again, addressing and understanding a little bit, as you're saying, Mina, talking to the people. We need to have this conversation. I think one of the positive things that we have managed to succeed so far is opening up the conversation. I still remember having interviews with foreign journalists. I would talk about abortion. I would say, the big A, because I was scared to even say the word abortion. And that was not so long ago. We're talking 2017, Now it's a conversation that today in EuroPride, we're actually having this discussion openly recorded. So I think we have come very far. I think it's something that, it will take time to deconstruct. I myself had to go through that journey that I was ingrained, brought up with, put in me of this value and the sanctity of the life, beginning from conception, and equally people belonging to the queer community have been brought up in the same society that I have. Yeah. So I think by having this conversation, by realizing and recognizing, going back to what I was saying at the beginning, that we're talking about ultimately bodily autonomy as a human right. Mm-hmm. I think slowly it will change. Of course, we will still have those individuals. Everybody's entitled to their opinion, but I think we're already seeing that shift, and I think it's getting a bit better by time.
Okay. Yeah. I think, I'm not sure if this is part of the program, but I'm seeing quite a lot of people here and we still have some time, and I would really like to open up the opportunity for anyone who might have questions that I did not ask. Just, yes? Oh, yes, there is a roaming mic, so yeah, it's part of the...
That's amazing. and while the roaming mic is coming, at EuroPride 2018 in Stockholm, Ulrika had invited me to speak about the same topic and to ask me very similar questions about abortion in Malta and why are you so ahead on LGBTI rights, but abortion is still like a taboo. And so it's been like a topic at EuroPride actually. Yeah. Multiple times, thanks to activists across the world, across Europe who are listening to us.
But it is an advantage we're having it here.
No, it's amazing that we're having it here.
It's like, wow, this is really good.
Yes.
From first, thank you all for giving such an incredible panel, because the fact that we can have this talk in public is pretty impressive in its own right. So I'm non-binary, and I'm someone with a uterus. So the abortion conversation is relevant to me personally. So, but when it comes to organizations that obviously they want to censor women at the expense of trans people, like they would actively, I'm talking about, for example, Doctors for Choice, which they do incredible work, don't get me wrong, but every single post that they make is just women, nothing else, women full stop, you know? But when I try to respond to just like, hey, could you maybe say women and other people, in which other people can be people who menstruate, people who have a uterus, etc. They, for one, I don't get a response from them personally. This isn't just about that organization, but it's a common issue, and they're the main example in my head. But even from, I get the backlash from even trans people, and like, I'm trying to include you specifically. Why are you coming against me from it? So my question is, what sort of response can I have to that kind of, honestly, I get attacked for it sometimes. So,
But
like,
it's very sad, you know, that you're getting attacked because it shouldn't be. But I think I would say, you know, march on and keep on doing it. You know, there's a lot of, we have a long way to go. I think, you know, we started, we're doing really well, but we have a long way to go. I myself, you know, had to become aware of the inclusivity. Again, this is not something that I was brought up as a child, and I'll give you a complete different example. I talk about, you know, LGBTI issue with my kids, and, you know, or I'm talking about a friend with my 12-year-old, well, now 13, and she go, oh, you cannot say she. And I go, well, yeah, but she's she, you know, she's your friend. And she goes, Ma, it's they, you don't know. So it's like, I'm getting this from my 13-year-old because this is how they're brought up. So for her, it's a very natural thing. But it's not so natural for perhaps other people of older generations. So I always say, keep it up, march on, you know, hold on, and, you know, just very politely, just keep on going at it. But thank you for pointing this out. This is a very, very valid point.
I also think that, you know, anyone on this panel included, and anyone who has been an activist from any for any issue, there is going to be backlash, and it's shit, it really is, but it usually means that you're making noise. And that is something that you need to be like, okay, and use as fuel as opposed to kind of bringing you down, you know?
the fact that that's it, I think it's not turned off.
No, it's on.
Okay.
We can hear you.
Sorry. It's the fact that it came from someone who should know better. Is the main thing that hurts. Like, if it was just like some random cis dude, I was like, okay, sure, I don't really care anyway, you know?
Right.
But the fact that it's coming from someone who, like, accusing me of trying to erase women in the conversation,
I
when
think
I'm trying to bring other people in.
I think that it can be very difficult, and I hear what you're saying, because if the overall messaging that is going out there is women, 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 then we as trans and non-binary people don't see us anywhere in that conversation, and we might feel actually fully excluded. At the same time, maybe devil's advocate towards my own community, I don't know, but I don't know. Maybe better to have the conversation as a side conversation, but like from a communications point of view, I consult on inclusive language, like to various political organizations, activists. I've been working in campaigns for a number of years, and I don't think anyone has quite found the
perfect
right
formula
way to go about it. And the thing that I've said is so one thing is to say maybe go more generic, or I say go more specific.
Yeah.
So indeed, like people who can get pregnant is great, because actually not all cis women can get pregnant either, right? And then maybe they are feeling excluded of this conversation as well. Who knows, right? So but it's weird. It's a balance, right? And I think, in my opinion, in my view, if an organization that is fighting for reproductive rights, where reproductive rights is mainly a concern for women, has 50% of their posts that are specifically having the word woman in them, I don't necessarily see an issue with that, because, and it's a discussion also within women's sports and sports in general, is like that area has been so like underfunded, undersupported, completely ignored, like historically, like that historical thing that to me it's like okay to sort of like equalize it, while you look at then some organizations' websites and they will spell out what they mean when they say certain things. It's not perfect. None of this is perfect, and I don't expect organizations to be perfect. But it's weird and it's nuanced, and I think often those conversations, when we have them online, do not give space for that nuance and that discussion. Because once I meet with and talk to these individuals who might, let's say, seem to categorically ignore trans men and non-binary folks who can get pregnant in their communications, it's like they see me and they see who I am and they understand me. So it's, I don't know, it's hard. I don't think we have a solution yet. No. But I think as we can help to find that solution. So the hope is that there's openness to, workshop it together or discuss it together. It might be easier in English than in Maltese sometimes, and all of that other stuff.
I think we will see a change with younger generation. There will be a change. It will be natural for them. So I'm hopeful. I'm always hopeful. That's always my optimistic self.
I don't think of progression as having a like of linear time kind of thing. I think
yes, no, of course.
I think younger generations are having more access to diverse communities and diverse language, because our diverse communities and queer communities are being more supported at the moment. And so it's helping. And so the younger generations now are helping, and then hopefully they can shape that conversation better. But it's not a guarantee.
I am getting the signal that it's time to close. Maybe some final reflection.
I think the last thing that I wanted to kind of bring up, which was the question that you were going to ask, was the final one, which was why we're so kind of far ahead when it comes to LGBTQI issues, but not on reproductive rights. And I think what kind of stands out to me, particularly this year, is when there was the law change regarding abortion in Malta. There was it was quickly slipped in that it was going to be amended right after it passed. And this was after, in response to a lot of uproar from conservative and fascist organizations, speaking out. And I think that really, for me, symbolized that, in Michael Jackson's words, they really don't care about us, at all, They really just want to get the most votes, and I just don't think that it is an issue for them, whether it's reproductive rights or LGBTQI issues. It is what makes them most popular and what will give them the most people-pleasing, response. And that shift, for me, really symbolized that. Anyway, that was my final.
To pick up about the connections between the anti-gender movement and the anti-abortion movement, the anti-vax movement, the anti-freedom of speech, usually, and freedom of, a plurality in society. They're very well connected, they're very well funded. We need to get to know them more. We need to understand, so to say, the enemy, so that we can work better. But when it comes to abortion and the queer community, I think that we're like on a good space where we can work together and pool our resources rather than be divided by them, because we are a community, whereas they're very, I don't know, I don't have the right
Fragmented.
words, but you know, we are a community and it feels better, you know.
Yeah.
We can fight together as a community because, yeah, we've built that in time.
Lara, your
Last
final
words.
comments?
Yeah, okay, so taking up from that, yes, we need to continue to join forces. We need to continue to fight together because ultimately we are fighting for our human rights. And I think if we don't do that, if we become fragmented, especially knowing, as Mina, you were saying, how well-funded and well-structured they are, you know, they'll continue to divide us, which is something we absolutely don't want. We know what is out there. We know what is coming to us here, which has already started coming. And now is a crucial time to really join forces. I wish you all a happy Pride. It's really proud to be at Pride. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.